Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining our webinar today on branding, why it's important, how to build a valuable brand, and how to protect it. So joining us on the panel today, we've got Julia from Baxter IP, and we have Damien Rossi from Found MPR. So wondered if we could just kick off, Julia, perhaps if you could give us 30 seconds of with a brief bio, who you are and what your background is.
Yes, of course. So my name is Julia Cornt. I'm a trademark attorney at Baxter IP. My background has been at a number of large multinational companies, mainly at Nestle for 15 years, working as the IP advisor, and then at Lion, working as the IP manager, advising on their brands as well. So a lot of in-house experience, and now from the private practice point of view. So working in Baxter IP.
That's great, Julia. Damien?
Good afternoon, Alistair. Good afternoon, Julia. Alistair, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk today. My background, I am a brand and strategy guy. I've worked with brands my whole professional career. I now work exclusively with owner managers, but I started out with businesses who took commodities and turned them into very powerful wealth generating brands. People like Guinness with Diageo and Smirnoff Johnnie Walker. Similar to Julia, I worked with Nestle where they took coffee, created household brands to drive value. I spent a period of time in strategic planning for News Corp in Europe, where for 6 years I was head of strategy. And that was interspersed then with a stint in private equity, acquiring owner managed businesses, always looking for the ones with strong brands. Before latterly moving to Australia, again with News Corp, where I was market director for assets up and down the East Coast in Queensland. Thank you.
That's great. That's a good summary from you both. So I guess just by way of introduction, we've had a few requests to throw this topic on the agenda for a webinar, and I guess brand has never been more important than it is right now. And without going into perhaps all the detail of what we'd like to cover off on today, I think it can probably be summarised in two simple points. Firstly, how do you build a valuable brand, or a brand that's worth protecting? And once you have that brand, how do you go about protecting that brand value? So I wonder whether we could start off, Damien. What are we talking about here? What do we mean by brand?
Well, it's a very good question, Alistair, right? Because this is something you can't drop on your toe or stack on a shelf. Yet it's arguably the greatest wealth generator for owner managed businesses is their brand. Alistair, I always like to think of it as, what's the gut feel people have about your business? Those people could be your employees, they could be your customers, could be your competitors. But what is that gut feel? What is it they think about your business? Now that may or may not be what you want them to think about it, but that's brand management. That's what that's about, be able to do that intentionally. But I'd wager, if many of the viewers in this webinar now were to ask 10, 20 of their customers, there's a danger you get 10 or 20 answers. How do you feel about my business? But nevertheless, that is brand. And when it's done well, Alistair, brand is an internal touchstone for every decision you make around capital, around people, around strategy. But also it's a signal to the market about who you are and how you create value for them. If you get that right and your value is aligned through your brand to what your customers want, well, then your brand is a shortcut for their decision making. And it makes it easier for the customer to buy from you. It supports higher price, it supports top line revenue, and critically for owner managers, if and when you come to sell, it supports a significantly improved enterprise value. So yeah, Alistair, you know, you're preaching to the converted in me when you say there's never been more important topic. There really hasn't been, and especially for the owner manager cohort out there.
That's good. That's good. So you talk about value, brand value, and you mentioned enterprise value there. So just give us an insight into why brands are valuable, or why brand is valuable, and how brand adds value to a business.
Okay, let's talk about something we all have to deal with every day: price. Now, I've worked in businesses where, forgive me for saying so, pricing conversations were preceded by a prayer meeting because the management were nervous and uncertain about how the customer is going to react. Now, I get that. But if you show me any business, Alistair, that has good products and services and strong leadership, but show me a comparable business with good products and services and strong leadership and a brand, and I'll show you a business that earns higher margin. And so in that respect, brand is code for margin. And Alistair, the reason that's the case is because, as you well know, and indeed I learned from you, perceived value is the key to competitive advantage. What your customers think you're worth, perceived value. And the building block of perceived value is your brand. So looked at in that light, it is brand that supports perceived value. It is brand that drives your competitive advantage. And therefore it is brand that earns you the superior returns your efforts warrant. Margin, above average top line growth, and higher enterprise value when you come to sell. And if I may say, just as brand can be broken down to margin and price, there's two other things I would just like to mention about just how important this is. First of all, brand is not voodoo. It's not magic. It's not interrupting just the right Facebook conversations, nor is it having a great picture on your homepage or your website. Brand is how you serve your customers. And understanding from the customer in how they want to be served and organizing your whole business to deliver that. But again, if I may go back to this idea of price, because I think it's a handle we can all latch onto and understand, because it's a real decision we make every day. When I'm working with my clients, the biggest challenge is defending their pricing strategy. Oh my goodness, Alistair. What chance does a sales guy have to defend a pricing strategy if he doesn't understand what it is he's selling, really? If he doesn't understand the true value of what they're creating. Because if your sales team don't understand that, AKA your brand, what chance has the customer have of understanding that? So what I'd love to have done in the last 60 seconds, do it 120 seconds, is get the audience to realize perhaps that brand is not this intangible piece. Brand is actually a value creation engine in your business.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. I'd like to bring Julia in, but before I do, should just make clear we've got a couple of experts here on the panel today on building brands and then protecting brands. So feel free to throw a question in the Q&A section on the webinar, and we'll endeavour to get through as many questions as we can. So just one more question for you, Damien, just to leave Julia on the sideline for a minute. Well, apologies for that.
Sorry, Julia, but I will back your expertise in a moment.
All good.
I'm sure she'll jump in. But what are the elements of a great brand? So what distinguishes a great brand from an also ran? What are those elements that make up a top-notch brand?
It's a great question, Alistair. It's a great question. Let me answer the question if I may. I'll back into it, but I'll tell you what isn't a great brand. A great brand doesn't mean have a really catchy logo. Logos are meaningless until you, as business owners, imbue them with meaning. Great brand doesn't mean spending money on Facebook or Google. That's just tactics. At its heart, there's two things we have to realize if we want to build a great brand. One is we don't build brands, people build brands. Brands are built in the day-to-day actions of your team, and then how those actions are interpreted by your customers. So as much as we'd love to say, oh my goodness, I'm in control of this, and I've built a very pretty brand, that's not a great brand necessarily. Brands are built in the day-to-day actions of your team and how those actions are interpreted by your customers. So first of all, but that leads to the next point. If that is the case, people build brands and they're not built in a day, they build it daily. A great brand is then built on a clear understanding of how your organization creates value. And our job as leaders is to frame that value. And frame it in a way your sales team understand it, your customer service team understand it. Oh my goodness, the person who stacks the shelf in your warehouse understands it. So they all line up behind it. So think about this. This is the way I think about it. A very simple 3-stage step. The step to building a great brand. 1, be very clear how you create value. It's not always simple to think of what it might be. I ship a product, but really the customer might be buying safety. Even though you're not in the safety business, you could be selling any product. What is it they're buying? Number 1. So you know how you create value. Then, Alistair, the second characteristic of a great brand is that value is communicated consistently across everything you do, not just in marketing and communication messaging, but how you answer the phone, how your team dress, how you package your products, how you handle issues and complaints. So clear how you create value. Secondly, great brands communicate that consistently. And the third thing then is great brands have an impact on your business, but also your customers' day-to-day businesses, and you're able to measure it. So please, 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 if someone tells me they're a great brand, I say, okay, well, show me the numbers, because it really should be delivered in the numbers, be it margin, be it brand awareness, Alistair, be it that thing that speaks to your sales team when they're not in the room. What is that thing? So they're the characteristics of a great brand. Create value, communicate value, measure that value.
That's good.
I would suggest.
Yeah, brilliant. So I want to flip perhaps to your side of the table, if you like, Julia, or your particular area of expertise. So we've got a brand, we've built this brand up, it's got various elements to that brand. How do we go about protecting it? Where do we start? What does that all look like?
Well, I think one of the key points in Damien's comments was consistency, and I also agree with that. You know, you've got to have an idea of what your brand represents, what its personalities are. From the logistics of a trademark portfolio or protection, a great brand is something distinctive that is going to identify your business, that is going to allow people to find you in a very crowded market. It's going to help you stand out and identify yourself to consumers. So a great brand is always something distinctive. If obviously there's different variations on distinctive levels of distinctiveness, but you know, a brand such as Adidas or Kodak, obviously an older brand, but still very relevant. Apple for computers and phones, they're very distinctive and they draw your attention and they stand out. Obviously, as Damien said, with consistency over their message over a long period of time. But it's protecting those brands from a word mark to a logo to your slogan, so that you are protected, that you have that distinctive name that you can have a monopoly on and that you can own, and then you can defend as well.
So you're speaking about defending that brand in the marketplace. What are the risks, you might say, of not putting in the work on that front, not defending that brand?
Well, I mean, the number one issue with not defending your brand is that if you allow your mark to be used by other people without control, you lose control of your brand. Worst case scenario, it becomes a generic brand. And there's examples all over the market of situations where a brand has become generic, whether, you know, how many people go down to the park and play with their flying disc? Most people would say Frisbee. Who uses a hook and eye closure on their shoes? It's Velcro that they use. So there's all these examples of marks that could potentially become, well, have potentially become generic and harder to defend. So if you're controlling your brand, if you're making sure that it's used as a trademark, if you're making sure that it's used correctly and you're controlling that use, then you have a better chance of maintaining that value in that brand. So, and it's defending it insofar as if you see somebody using unauthorized use of it or a same or similar trademark, taking action to do something about it. And it's also protecting your brand from the perspective of, you know, use it properly. make sure you're using your mark correctly. You're using your mark as you've registered it. It's within your guidelines and how the personality of the brand that you want to represent. So there's a lot of different facets of that.
That's good. That's good. You spoke about earlier about brand personality. Just give us an idea of what you mean by that.
Well, from the larger brands that I've worked with in the past, for example, Milo has a very clear guideline of their brand personality. So what their brand represents, their market, how they want to be represented in their marketing materials and to their market. It's, you know, choosing spokespeople who are appropriate and within those brand guidelines. So it's not choosing somebody that goes against their personality and their what they want to achieve from the brand. So it's having an idea of what your brand is, how you want to market it, how you want to be seen, and it's obviously sticking with those guidelines that you put in place. And obviously making sure your customers, clients, anyone using your mark under license, they also stick to that as well.
That's good. That's good. We've got a question here from Stuart. He says, we've got a brand that consumers and our retailers associate with a premium high quality product and, you know, at a level above others that are on the market. They've got a new competitor that's got a lower quality product sold online only. The customer can't feel the product before they purchase. So with the use of good imagery and so on, they're building their brand to make theirs look equivalent quality, even though it's subpar. How do we break away and prove that ours is truly high quality when they have a larger marketing budget? So tough question. Who wants to take it?
Julie, that's a great question, right? It's a really great question. But I think there's two aspects to brand now. Stuart, was it?
Stuart, yep.
So Stuart, there's two aspects to brand. Brand is both promise and performance. Sounds like these guys are big in the promise part, and you're very big on the performance part. So let me put it another way. So think about that. Their promise, your performance. You might want to think about how over time will their promise hold up. There's many, many ways you could look at this. And here's a few you might want to think about. One is this: are you actually selling to the same people? So are they selling to the same people who value your quality? In which case you would argue, well, that's not going to be a sustainable path for them because your quality is noticeably different. But there's a risk. And forgive me for saying so, are you really that better quality? Or let me rephrase it. Is your quality better in a way that matters to the customer? Are you clear that there's a differential that matters to the customer? Remember, I'm afraid to say it, quality is not what we think it is. It's what the customer thinks it is. That's an interesting piece. So let's be clear, first of all, if you could, are we really better, or in the eye of the consumer, is it closer than we might think? And that might be a difficult conversation to have internally, but it's worth asking. But let's say, okay, promise performance, you are that much better. There's a number of things you can do to signal you're different. One is, and again, this might not sound attractive, but your price is up. Signal to the market the thing all of us in this call have been trained to believe since we're children, that in life, as in business, you get what you pay for. So price is the number one intuitive indicator of quality. So maybe you should use price to signal you're different. Then beyond that, you can understand, well, what claims are they making? Is there a territory you can move into that is different? Things like, for example, warranty. If the product really is of much better quality, have confidence in the warranty. Remember, warranties are 99% perception, only 1% claim. So along with price, warranty is another way you can back the promise element. Let them have, so the performance element, let them have the promise, arguably, and you deliver and you're differentiating there. First things first though, and Julia, I know will have a view on this as well, but first things first, I would talk to the customer. Make sure we really do have that differential. Make sure it is defendable. because it may not be in the eyes of the customer. It's worth checking out, I would suggest.
That's good. That's good. I've got one for Julia.
Yeah.
This is from Steve. Is there any realistic way to protect IP and brand beyond the obvious trademarks and copyright? So he's saying a lot of IP is in the owner or the manager's head. They delegate and divest that in-house knowledge. Marketing often releases this out into the open.
Mm-hmm.
How can that be protected?
Well, I guess the main area would be confidential information and trade secrets. And that really is the balance of, you've got employees that are working for you and they're working for you for a long period of time, and they do acquire a lot of knowledge. So it's, I guess, trade secrets, confidential information. It is a tough boundary to sort of really put a mark on, but it would be keeping things written down as much as you can. It is really protecting it as best you can. Yes, there are the fundamental and the trademarks, the patents, the copyright, things like that. But yeah, copyright is copyright, trade secret, and confidential information. It's really the key of keeping it all. Keeping a record of it, where things were originated from, and keeping it confidential in the trade secrets, keeping it private, confidential, and to the eyes of the people who need it only. I'm not sure that sort of answers the question, but
yeah, sure. And so taking some of that stuff that might be, a big amorphous blob of information, perhaps into documentation, into internal processes, and
documenting
allows some of that protection to be. That layer of protection to be added, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, it's documenting it, it's knowing where things have originated from, and it's also, it can go as far back as the employment agreement, where you've got the confidentiality, it's the IP that you create during your employment, and keeping it there, the IP of the company, that kind of thing as well. So it can sort of, again, have a multitude of different ways to protect it.
That's good. Got a question here from Jaden. He says, what's the best way to determine the ROI of branding on your physical products that you sell, and then how to present this to management? So he's got 3 hurdles. He says, unsure of which brand and how much brand real estate to give to it, the costs for printing and branding, the 2, and then 3, having to change a supplier that can brand the product. So they're the current pain points that business is feeling in terms of our ROI on branding, on product branding.
Oh my goodness, that's a great question, Jaden. And you know what? It's a question that every marketeer is asking themselves every day. May I have a go with that?
Go for it, Damien.
Okay. First of all, how many brands? I'm not sure if this is specifically Jaden's question, but I'll just knock this over, please, and then I'll go on to the ROI question. How many brands?
Not too sure.
No. I got to tell you, every brand you have in your business is like a child that wants to be educated, wants to be fed and clothed, wants to borrow the car and go out on Saturday night. Every one of them needs love, nurture, and care. And oh my goodness, every one of them could potentially give you a headache. They're children, right? Most businesses struggle to manage one. Why on earth would you have more than one if you didn't have to? I don't know if you've watched the trade press, as I have a DMs for Julia and I do, and I also do. Adidas recently sold Reebok because it was all too hard, because they found it difficult to manage multiple brands. Remember, a brand isn't just a mark, as Julia spoke about. It's not just a logo. It's a gut feeling people have about your set of products. So I'm always a big fan on fewer is better. Clean house, I would suggest. Terribly sweeping statement, and I don't know your business, but in principle, clean house. Then let's get on to ROI. Different things have to be measured in different ways. What I mean by that is this. The way you build a brand short-term and the way you build a brand long-term are different. And not only are they different, I'm afraid to say they're incompatible. If you want to drive sales today, this week, this quarter, that's about short-term rational messages, sales activation, promotions, discounts. You're appealing to customers' rational short-term needs. Buy one, get one free. Free toaster, set of steak knives, kind of territory, but it's really important. You need that. Create noise in the trade. You're supporting your trade partners, perhaps. You're denying your competitors oxygen. Sales activation. Unfortunately, and I think back to, was it Stuart's point earlier on about a premium price product? Short-term activation plus short-term activation does not generate a long-term wealth generation to brand. In fact, it could actually undermine it, because long-term brand effects are built by broad reach, creative messaging, brand building. And so you need a little bit of A and a little bit of B, a little bit of sales activation, a little bit of brand building, but they have different metrics. So I can tell you how a client of mine does it. So sales activation is measured to exactly what it sounds like. Short-term changes to customer dynamics. And Alistair, with your permission, I can share afterwards some of the metrics we use. But again, this is stuff I was just taught to do. So what do we sell in the promotion period? What do we think we would have sold in the promotion period? What volume sales do we just bring forward? So we can actually cannibalize future sales that we would have sold anyway. So quite often, just half a dozen questions like that, you realize much better picture of what was happening in the ROI. Longer term, I work with a client that simply asks 3 questions every quarter to a sample of customers. Question A, when I say my company name, what words spring to mind? Okay. What do you associate with my company? What ideas? And how is that different from my competitors? Long-term brand associations, I measure it that way. The whole thing is not to confuse the two. Don't compare what your digital agency is telling you that they're getting for your pay-per-click ads with long-term brand building. They're 2 different metrics, and just to remember to keep them separately, I would suggest.
That's good. That's good. I had a question myself, and Junior's come in and pinched it, which is all right. So I'm gonna phrase it in his words. Firstly to yourself, Damien, and then to Julia. Does the panel have any comments on brand architecture? You know, so branded house or house of brands, endorsed brand. He says as an importer distributor model of global brands and some private label products. It's something that has been raised with them, and aren't particularly familiar with. Is it important to get right for enterprise value? So I guess what we're coming back to is probably going on from the question we just spoke about. You know, a one hero brand, if you like, versus you know, perhaps a house of brands, and then perhaps to Julia. What does that mean in terms of having to run through protection for a whole house of brands?
Okay. Alistair, I might just set the outset, I've prepared a 1-pager on this that I'll happily share with everybody afterwards, and it may be of value, I don't know, and people, so yep. I'll share that after you via you, if I may.
That's right, yep.
But just to be really clear, just so everyone in the call understands, if I may, and I don't want to state the blindingly obvious, what we're talking about here. So let's say over this end of the room, we got a business with a portfolio of brands, 3 or 4 different marks, and the products are different and the markets they serve are different. Great. You want to maximize the number of customers you can serve, but you don't really want an overlap between them. So think about Procter & Gamble. They own Duracell batteries and Braun shavers and Oil of Olay cosmetics and Pampers nappies, all the one company. So it's a portfolio of brands. Okay. The other end, over this end of the room, right? We've got a mono brand. That's Samsung, right? They'll sell you an oil tanker or a nuclear reactor or a phone, but it's all Samsung. So that's where the products you're offering are similar and the market served may be different, but you decided, you know what? I'm Nike, I'm IBM, I'm Samsung. I just want to put everything into one brand because that's my money maker. And when I sell my business, I want a big dollop of goodwill in that brand equity. So portfolio of brands or just one. Now, somewhere in the center, I think is what your question you're asked about. It's called a hybrid strategy. So this is where you might have an endorser brand. You might say Kellogg's Fruit and Fiber, Kellogg's Cornflakes, Kellogg's All Brand. So everybody knows it's the Kellogg's family, but it's individual brands. Toyota Prius, Toyota Prado, Land Cruiser. That's it. Cadbury's Fruit and Nut, Cadbury's Dairy Milk, and hybrid brands. Hybrids are kind of the most popular. So sorry, Alice, just go and talk about that. We're just, on the same page. And forgive me if I thought anybody the blindingly obvious there. Okay, let's talk about some pros and cons about each. So let's talk about the portfolio brands. We have lots of different brands in your business. Oh my goodness, it's so easy for customers to navigate. There's no confusion. Every brand is different. And within your business, each brand is freed up to play its own game. That's really cool. Every brand can stand on its own 2 feet and have its voice. And heck, if one stumbles, which I do want to talk about if we can, Alistair, later on, if one takes a stumble, there's no contagion to the rest. So easy to navigate for the customers, stand alone, own voice, fine. The negatives are it burns resources. Of course it does. There's all these children, so to speak. It adds complexity internally, and there's massive duplication of marketing effort. So typically it's the big boys who do portfolios, portfolio management. To give you an example, when I was Nestle, I worked on the Nescafe coffee brand. Down the big open plan office was the Gold Blend team. Further down was the confectionery team. We never talked. We were different brands. That's a portfolio strategy. Look at mono brands, just one brand, Nike, IBM, Samsung, whatever. Brilliant at building equity in your brand. Of course it does, because everything you pump out is going to one focused place. So no duplication of effort, no internal complexity, and cross-selling is so much easier. That's pretty cool, right? Except the con is it's very difficult for any brand to be seen as more than one thing. Like you can't be a premium supplier and a budget supplier. Well, it's very hard to do so one brand. It can dilute your standing in the market if you're trying to be all things to all people with just one brand. That's tricky. And reputational damage, if you make a misstep, there's contagion across the whole brand. So it's easy, but it's risky, okay? And finally, the in-between one, the hybrid, where it's Kellogg's Cornflakes, Coca-Cola Diet Coke, Cadbury's Dairy Milk. Actually, it's pretty good, right? And that's the one I tend to favor, tell you the truth, because you're building equity in your overall brand, the endorser or parent brand. It's super flexible because you're building your brand equity while speaking to different customers. Your parent brand delivers kind of credibility and an endorser, and each little sub-brand can benefit from the other's success. So you typically get 1 + 1 + 1 doesn't equal 3, Alistair, it equals 5. But there is a con as well. There's a little bit of risk of confusion. So your packaging is very important, your messaging is very important. Sometimes you get it wrong, it can be difficult to create a clear identity for each sub-brand. And again, a misstep by one can lead to a bit of contagion. On balance though, all things being equal, speaking very generically, portfolio is too hard, too expensive. Mono is good if you're a genuine mono service company. Not too hot, not too cold, just right in the middle. That hybrid strategy, I think, tends to work for most.
That's good. That's good. So taking what Damien said, Julia, and applying the thinking around, the ease and the perhaps some of the headaches that might come with trying to protect that brand from one end or one extreme to the other. What are your comments around that?
Well, I think the first thing to consider when you're especially when you're importing a brand into this market, is to ensure that the trademark is able to be used and there's nobody else that owns it already in the market here. So, and I guess speaking to Damien's comments about, focus on or avoid diluting your brand too much by having too many brands, sub-brands on the same packaging, it can confuse customers and it takes away from your message, and it obviously takes away from the reputation of the brand as well. So I think, I agree with Damien. You can certainly do, you can have organizations that are massive and have different brands such as Nestle, and different business units that have very different brands and rarely talk amongst each other. But, you know, if you've got, if you're a smaller company, then focusing on the one brand is going to be the, probably your focus, I would recommend. And from a pack structure, you're just having too many brands. Again, like I say, it just confuses the consumer, it confuses the branding and takes away from your branding message.
That's good. That's good. So, Damien, you raised the point earlier, and perhaps it's particularly risky at the mono brand scale, end of the scale. When something bad happens, reputation management, crisis management.
Yeah, that thing we don't like to think about or talk about, but happens. Do you know what, Alistair, and I'm sure Julie would agree with this, as humans, and I'm maybe drawing a long bow to talk about brands, but actually please bear with me for a moment. As humans, we're hardwired to react defensively. It's who we are. But in business, as in life, as in branding, getting out ahead of the crisis, I would suggest, is key. So let's say something goes wrong. You have a formulation that somehow went wrong. You have I'm dealing with a client right now, pool manufacturer, spraying the inside of the pools. It isn't lasting as long as we thought. Now, these pools are in houses all over Australia. This revolutionary coating, oh my goodness, right? That's a real problem. So our initial reaction, most of our initial as humans, when you're confronted with a crisis or someone who highlights something that we've done, a mistake perhaps, is, hey, let's dig in. Don't say anything. Let's be combative and say it's not a big deal, okay? I humbly suggest, as in life, but in brand, that only escalates the fight and makes both parties angrier and results in more collateral damage to your stakeholder value. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to protect here, and Julie is an expert in, okay? What you really want to do as a brand owner is de-escalate and convince the other party that you register their anger, you register their disappointment, and you're taking it seriously. And I've seen business owners use this de-escalation strategy, not only in their companies and their brands, but also in their relationship with directors and, dare I say it, personal lives. And I think they are good signposts. So if I may say, there's kind of a rule of three around dealing with the brand and an issue as it happens to de-escalate. And again, acknowledging most of us hope this never happens, right? So whether it's a customer, a supplier, a vendor, or an employee, building a strong brand is one thing, but sustaining it is another. So one thing, the top person goes out front. Don't send your EA, don't send your head of marketing, don't send your head of sales. The top person goes out front and is seen to be handling the issue. Top person. Takes us to number two, acknowledge the issue. We acknowledge the issue and say, I understand this. Dare I say it, no weasel words. We understand what happened. And then thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, overcorrect. So the top person goes out front, honestly acknowledges there is an issue, and overcorrects. Alistair, there's a couple of global examples. They're much bigger than my Spray Creek guy, but it's kind of, if I may, so I don't even know who was born at the time, but this is a masterclass example of how to handle this. I know it's a mega big example, but it's a really interesting point. And then I'll share an example of how not to handle it. 1982, Johnson & Johnson, household name, manufactured Tylenol, pain relief. Somebody who was never discovered, by the way, never ever found, laced some of these tablets, Tylenol tablets, with cyanide. People died. Okay. Incredibly tragic. So the CEO got out front and center, not PR, not sales, not head of production, the CEO, and acknowledged that this was a obviously horrific, tragic incident. Now, Johnson & Johnson then broke new ground by what they did next. They acknowledged it. They didn't say, oh, it's an isolated incident and we're not sure and we're investigating, or said it's business as normal. No, they cleared every single shelf in the US of every bottle of that product. Trust. They established trust straight away. Remember we said senior person, acknowledge the issues, overcorrected. Boy, do they overcorrect. They simply wiped the product off the face of the United States of America. That was no small feat. They spent $100 million back in the 80s relaunching it in 1982. And in the long run, wow. 52 weeks later, so 1 year later, they were back worth more than they were before the crisis. Their brand measurement metrics were stronger and the shares continue to skyrocket. They wrote the playbook. They really did. And so that idea of senior person, acknowledge the issue, overcorrect was established then. But look, that sounds easy to say. And then someone else made an absolute disaster. And this is Alistair, you prompted me to think about this one. So 1989, again, Exxon Valdez, an ocean liner ran to ground. It was the exact opposite of Johnson & Johnson. First of all, you know who came out front? The VP of Public Relations. Oh my goodness. So the CEO went AWOL, okay? Then they said, oh, well, I know this ship was flying our flag, but it wasn't really we rented it. You know, it was a third-party contractor team who were piloting it. So, you know, it wasn't kind of our problem, okay? And then they simply didn't overcorrect. You know what they did? 10 days after the spill, Exxon ran an ad apologizing for the spill, but not taking responsibility. That is a textbook for what not to do. Now, they may seem like global big issues, as in Exxon Valdez, as in Johnson & Johnson, as in the engineering drawings you send out with an error. It happens to all of us. The principles are the same. De-escalate, senior person, acknowledge it, own it, and overcorrect. And my experience, and it's just my experience, is that Aussie businesses, who we all sell to, are quick to forgive, so long as you handle it correctly.
That's good. That's a good lesson. I've got a question here from Stephen, but I'm going to paraphrase him a little bit. Because it was a question that I wanted to ask. It's really about brand strategy. So why is actually having a brand strategy important? I know that's a pretty open-ended question. So that's directed to you, Damien, but then to Julia at the same level. Why is having a brand protection strategy important?
Good question.
Because A, there's the strategy part of it, but B, it's how far do you go? Where do you start and stop?
You know, it's a great question. I'm fascinated with Julie's answer because it's one thing building a brand, it's another thing protecting it. But look, this is what I would say. There isn't a person on this call right now who would dream of building their home on shifting sands. There isn't a person who would dream of progressing forward in their car today without knowing how to drive it. They just simply wouldn't do that. Yet we have perhaps the greatest wealth generating asset in their business, their brand. And it's delegated to the marketing department, or it's delegated to a salesperson, or heck, we let the market dictate who we are. Now, I think this is particularly at risk. It's a risky area for owner managers, if I may say. Again, the only people I've worked with for over 4 years now are owner managers, because they're particularly prone to strategic drift, where every tender is a must-win, must-compete sort of space, where really bright, attractive advertising people are persuading you to spend money on this campaign or that campaign or whatever it might be. But what that's about is strategic drift, tactic to tactic, short-term to short-term, burning cash and energy, where for the budget spent and the impact, it's next to worthless. The strategy is about taking time to just stop for a moment, think about the customer, think about how we serve the customer, and then committing to it. I remember that, I think we spoke about it earlier on. Know how you create value. communicate that value to the customer so they see the world as you do and buy in, and then measure that value to price, to margin, market share, whatever it might be. Without that, it's a tough bit. It's tough. I think it's really hard trying to run a business without that, because not just strategic drift, but you're working against the environment. You're walking facing into the wind, uphill. Having a brand, it's about aligning yourself to the environment, and that's why a brand strategy is so important. But Julia.
Yeah, it's a good question. It is a good question about where do you stop, but obviously where do you start is the key. I think once you've got a brand, you have to protect it. So you do have to take, well, you don't have to, but it's recommended to take steps to protect your brand from a trademark registration perspective. And a lot of it will largely depend on the number of brands you're using, where you're using the mark, whether it's Australia, whether it's in overseas markets. It's how many sub-brands you have. What you want to protect might be all of it, but then from a financial perspective, that impact is going to be quite large. So again, that has to also come into it. So it is a balance of, this is what I want, this is what I'm prepared to spend, and meeting in the middle. Obviously, if you're Nestle and you've got a multitude of brands and they're all equally important, then you're going to have to make sure that you are protected in the best way possible. But you should start at looking at the brands that are the most important for you, whether that's your company brand that is featuring on all goods and or services. Protect that as the first step. Protect your logo. If you have sub-brands, consider how important they are to your reputation, to your market, to your future plans. And if they are of significance and of massive importance, then you should consider protecting them as well. From an overseas perspective, I mean, there's certainly the desire to protect everywhere. Let's protect everywhere. We might go here, we might go into there, we might go there. That scattergun approach is going to be, again, very expensive. So it's very much looking at the markets that you are currently working in, whether that's Australia, New Zealand, the US, Canada, whatever the case. If you're in talks with someone in the EU or based in the EU or based in the UK or based in India somewhere, then potentially that's based on those discussions, that may be where you want to protect your brand next. The markets that are, or the countries that are, I would like to be protected here, but do I have plans to use? Potentially they can beat down the track. So like I say, it's very much a balance of the brands that you're using, the number of brands you're using, your realistic plans and future plans, and also from a financial perspective as well. Mm-hmm. It all has to come into play.
That's good. That's good. I've got a question from Mila. Is it important for a brand name to be catchy? Or does it just need to represent the product and service? Now, to reword it perhaps in your terms, Julia, I guess we'd perhaps term that distinctive. But your comments?
It would really depend on your end goal. So if your end goal is to have a brand trademark that you can own, you have nobody else in the market is using it, you can have a monopoly, you can then defend it, then you need a strong trademark. So catchy / distinctive is definitely the benefit. However, if your end goal is to use something that's descriptive in the market and excuse me, and sorry, and it's not something that you want to protect and have a monopoly in, then potentially something less distinctive may be where you want to go. So it really depends on your end goal. But again, that also impacts your protection of the mark. Obviously, distinctive marks are easier to have that monopoly to defend and to say, this is my trademark, these are the boundaries, your mark is the same or similar, and this is problematic. So you can easily defend it. Whereas if you're using a descriptive mark, you don't have that ability to potentially defend it from a trademark infringement point of view or a registration point of view.
That's good. That's good. We've got two questions here, one from Laurie and one from Julia. And I might direct it to you, Damien, because it probably relates back to some points you made earlier about asking questions of your customer. So Laurie says, how do we truly know if we have a good brand or not? Is this something that we can ask our customers? Julian's question, I think, related back. I think you referred earlier to 3 questions that you could potentially be asking your customers.
Right. And so I send you those questions. They're questions that come out of the US. They're by a large public body over there. How on earth do you know if you get a good brand or not? That's a really, really good question. Do you know what? Here's the thing. I could give you answers and talk about brand equity. I could talk about a measurement score where you look at how much goodwill is in your balance sheet. I could talk about all those things. But ultimately, it does come back to what's in the minds of your customers. I was thinking back to a question earlier on, and I think it's similar. How do you protect a brand? So how do you protect an asset if you cannot tangibilize it? And it's this. My hoary old sales trainer back in the days, 20 years ago, working with Diageo, said this. And it kind of touches on whether you have a good brand or not. The competitors, they can clone your products. They can hire your top sales team. They can rip off your ads. They can reverse engineer all your products and services. But if you have captured a piece of your customer's mind with your brand, it is yours for life. It is yours for life. That's the definition of a good brand. And the way to figure it out is to talk to your customers, to understand what really matters to them. And I would suggest a good brand, then, if you're asking questions, you'd want to think about 3 different kind of areas. Number 1, is our product any good? Obviously, because you can't build a good brand on a bad business. If your DIFOT is wrong, if your warranty claims are up, if there's some sort of failing around there, you're not getting back, or your invoices are inaccurate, it's hard to, that's a sign you probably don't have a good brand, okay, straight away. There's 2 other kinds of questions I'd focus on to understand if you've good value. How does your brand make people feel? Do they feel safe when they buy your product? Do they feel actually they're getting something quite innovative? Do they feel you make their life easier? So how do they make them feel, that emotional kind of sense? But the other area I'd inquire about to see if you've got a good brand after the functional stuff, if it does what your customers can weigh and count and measure, and after the emotional stuff is, what's the social aspect of your brand? What signal do people want to send out by buying your brand? Think about it on a building site. I quite often spend a lot of time with my clients on construction sites. Tradies drive up in Hilux, Ranger, Hilux, Ranger. Who's driving a Chinese ute? Not a lot of people. So what is the social aspect there? So your brand should really be about helping people do a functional job, but also express how they want to feel and express how they want to be seen by others. It's a signal tool. It's an emotional tool. It's a functional tool. So they're the kind of areas I'd explore to see if you've got a good brand. And Alistair, as it happens, I have another list of questions I could share. The questions I use myself when I'm doing research. I do an awful lot of talking to customers, or rather my clients' customers. And I'll share that list of questions for what it's worth. So you can see the kind of things I like to understand.
That's great. That's great. I've got a couple of questions that I think are directed at you, Julia. I'll pull them together.
Okay.
The first is a general question, which is it better to trademark words rather than with a logo? The second one is also relating to trademarks. Rita's saying she has a trademark including a logo from a company which has a name that consists of common words. It's a current dispute, or it's been refused because they are common words. She says, I have a chance at another dispute application. Want to know what the best evidence that people know who we are without the logo and only the words.
Okay.
Did I give you that clearly?
Yes. Okay. The second part of the question sounds a little bit involved, but I will start with the first one. So the difference between a word and a logo. The word will give you the broadest protection. So the word mark in the standard format, when you type it into the trademark field, when you apply for your trademark, that will give you the broadest protection. And it effectively gives you protection for a stylized version, or whether it's in a specific font of your logo, or how you use your trademark. So the word gives you the broadest protection. And it means that if you change font over the years, you're still basically covered because you've got the word trademark registered. The logo is also important from a perspective of if you've got image elements in your logo, if you've got geometric shapes in your logo, or something that identifies it or adds to it, and it's not just a stylization of the word, it's also recommended to protect your logo as well, because you are covered for those visual elements as well. However, the logo, it means if you have a rebrand for whatever reason, or you update your logo and you're not using it how it is registered, it means you then have to refile the logo application down the track. So potentially not too much of a fuss, but it is obviously something to keep in mind. So for the second part of the question, I think obviously it really depends on the examination report that you've received. It depends on the trademark itself, of course, but when you're looking at evidence of use and submitting evidence of use, it has to be done so in the form of a declaration with supporting exhibits, and it has to show basically the details of your mark, how you use it, how you came up with it, your sales and marketing figures, evidence of your use. And so that's evidence of the use as use of the mark as filed. So if you filed for a logo version and it's got specific words, then you have to identify that in your declaration. That is the evidence that you need to use to support your application. So just if it's a logo and you're just using the words, potentially they may not be sufficient to overcome the issues. But yeah, it really depends on how much use you have and obviously the objections that you've received.
Sure, that's good. I've got a question here from John, and it's a question that I think a few of those in the construction or the project industry might like an answer on. He says, we operate in the construction space, like to assist our clients in early project phases by providing advice on developments, design ideas, concepts, setting up sessions with professionals, engineers, consultants, etc. He says this is a complementary offering. Some clients take advantage of it by shopping around our custom or unique design in the industry. How do you suggest we protect this model? Now, I'd like to throw that at both of you and get your comments.
Okay. Shall I go first, Damien? Sorry to jump in.
Please.
Again, it really depends on the specifics and the information that you're providing, obviously. If it's paperwork, or if it's plans, or if it's a way of doing things, then potentially copyright is the angle that you would protect it. And obviously putting the copyright statement would be a really good first step, and identifying that it's considered confidential information. That may sound a little bit simple, but it does make people, when they see this confidential wording and they see the copyright statement, it does make most people stop and think, hang on a tick, should I be sharing this? Should I be using this outside of this situation? So yeah, it, like I say, depends on the specifics, but generally copyright is likely to be the most appropriate.
That's good. Damien, more from the perhaps the market positioning.
Yeah.
Model, which I think would be interesting to a bunch of people. What's your comments on that?
First of all, if I may say, John, without knowing your business, I think you're doing exactly the right thing. I think that's exactly where we need to compete. The world is awash with a dazzling array of people who can build stuff and weld stuff and fabricate stuff. Personally, I think this intangible design space where you're creating ideas and options is a really strong space to build your brand. So in principle, again, without knowing the business, I think you're operating exactly. But of course, no good deed goes unpunished, right? So you're producing all this value, you're giving it to the client. The next thing you know, they're shopping it around, okay? I think, if I may suggest, and again, it's generic, but you may be talking to the wrong customers, the wrong type of customers. In my experience, and I was again, just based on my training and my experience, that there's a cohort. Let's say there's different types of buyers out there. On the one hand, you get those specifiers who focus on price and maybe don't have a low trust level in any suppliers. They buy from suppliers, they buy from you based on price. They could be tire kickers, or they're looking for a bit of free consultancy, or hey, they just want to price check what's going around. They genuinely don't care about that wonderful value add you're creating for them. Next, they've got to go. At the other end of the spectrum, there's real value specifiers in the construction space. They buy and work with suppliers based on the ability of the supplier to add value to their project. Now, these guys can be brutal negotiators. We know that, right? But they do have a history of working with suppliers who add value to their business and who evolve with them. These guys understand that price-only purchasing is a false economy. And as long as you can demonstrate value, so as much as it's painful and annoying that you create this value, I would say, please keep doing it. But perhaps we need a better screening mechanism to understand who are the time wasters, who are the price buyers. And there's some doors you don't want to knock on. Let them go.
That's good. That's good. Conscious of the time, we've just run slightly over.
I could do this all afternoon. I love this conversation.
We've got a bunch of questions here. We're not going to be able to get through them all. I'd just like to throw one more at Julia and one more at yourself, if we can, Damien. And just encourage those when this session wraps up, just please just to fill out, give us a bit of feedback on the form. And if you'd like Julia or Damien or those of us here at Quantum to reach out, please let us know. So question for you, Julia, what if, this is from Simon, what if somebody is using the brand that I want to use for my new brand, or I'm paraphrasing here a little, if I'm getting the context of what he's saying, there's something that's similar, but it's close to what he wants to use. How do we, what's your advice to Simon?
I think a little bit more investigation is required. So if you haven't started using your brand yet and somebody else is already in the market with the same or very similar, you really need to investigate the use of the other party, what they're using the mark on, how they're using their mark, if they're using the mark, if it's registered. That way you can assess whether there is room for you to enter the market with the same name, but just in a different category, for example. So if they're using it on cars and you're going to use it on biscuits, then that's obviously very different categories and potentially may not overlap. If they're not using their mark and it's registered, then potentially there's a non-use action that you could consider to remove that trademark from the register. Not a simple way forward, but it would certainly clear the register for you. Yeah, investigate, find out what they're using it on, how they're using it. Consider Australian consumer law and the misleading and deceptive conduct and passing off angle as well. You know, if your branding is the same, if your website looks the same, if your packaging looks the same, or whatever the case, also consider that angle too, because that could be a potential issue as well. But there are options, but it just might take a little bit of time to consider and make your final decision. But it sounds as though there could be some level of risk involved, and you just have to make sure you do the correct investigations to figure out where that level of risk rests.
That's good. That's good. All right, we'll wrap up with one final question, if we can, to yourself, Damien. Well, I've got two questions here. I'm going to pull them together. Paul says, how does brand connect with our mission statement? Lewis says, can you draw a line between culture and brand? So I feel like we've come full circle. And we're back to the question that we opened with, which is, what is brand? Okay.
I love those questions. And thank you for giving me some really difficult ones at the end. People think brand is some sort of mark we send out into the world. And it is a signal. It's a flare we send up to say, look, this is who we are, what we stand for, how we create value. I get that. But actually, the greatest brands have always had another dimension, an internal dimension for your business. They act as a touchstone for every decision you make around people, investment, or strategy. They should guide the day-to-day activity. Now, I never played professional sport. I never played schoolboy sport, but Alistair and Julie, I'm sure you know that moment when you're in a team and you look and the whole team is facing in the same direction. It's culture and it's brand. Because your brand is the sum of all the actions everybody does in your business. And if done right, your brand can get everybody, just like that schoolboy football team, to face in the same direction, to react the same way, to know how they're going to behave. And they treat the customer very consistently. So in many ways, your brand should absolutely align to your culture. Are we a caring business? Are we genuinely interested in the success of our clients? Are we patient? Culture or brand? Arguably could be aligned. Now, some brands we spoke about earlier on, some businesses have more than one brand, and they could speak to different customers in different ways, in which case the brand will probably sit distinct from your organizational culture. Be aligned to it, because you've got to be able to sustain this, but it may be distinct. But most businesses, mono-brand businesses, yes, I'm a big advocate of brand not being a signpost to your business, but a window onto your business, because it's an accurate reflection of who you are. Mission then, personally, and oh my goodness, I'm sure, Alistair, you've done this before, you could do 50 webinars on mission. To me, mission is every day. What are we rocking up here to do? I think that perhaps can live separately to your brand. Clearly, brand serves your organization, it serves your company goals. But I often think vision is one day, mission is today. That's why we're turning up to work. How powerful would it be if your mission and your brand were aligned? That's a multiplier effect in your business. And that's how powerful brand could be, I think.
That's brilliant. Really appreciate that, Damien. I think we can probably finish on that. We've got a bunch of more questions which we're not going to be able to touch on, I'm afraid. However, we will provide some contact details, and if anybody would like to get in touch with Julia or Damien or vice versa, please just note that in the feedback survey. Really appreciate everybody coming along today. Big round of applause and thank yous for both Julia and Damien. And
thank you, Alistair.
Thank
you for having us.
Really,
thank you so much. I have loved this experience.
It's been
and it's
good.
Great to talk to people like this. It's brilliant. Appreciate it.
Very good. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Cheerio.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
See you all.
Yeah.